So, Peter, I think we have interesting stories to share with the audience about the change of profession that we made at some point and came into therapy from a different discipline. So, both of us are currently academics at in UK universities, and we're also practitioners, but we both came from a different background, didn't we? So, I can talk about mine and you can talk about yours. So you came from social work.
Yeah, so I trained as a therapist first,
Right.
and then kind of put that on hold, and then went and trained as a social worker, before then coming back and returning back to therapy. So I've transitioned in and out of the profession, if you like.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so I suppose what can I say about that? One of the difficulties I found when I qualified was, as a therapist, was finding paid employment. And I found that really quite difficult. And I was worried about kind of getting a job. And that's when I decided actually maybe social work might be a better profession for me in terms of employment. And that's when I went and did my master's in social work, and ended up going down that particular route. Um, and then it wasn't until maybe about 5 or 6 years ago when I then left social work and then moved into academia and my private practice as a therapist. Yeah.
And where would you see the connections, I mean, between social work and counseling?
Do you know what's really interesting about that is the connection is about building relationships with people. And it's interesting. I was talking to somebody else about this the other day. So when I left social work and I came back to being a therapist and working in private practice, I'd naively in my mind thought, "Oh, I've been working in a person-centered way in my social work, so returning back to being a therapist again will not be too much of a leap. Like there'll be enough similarity there for it to happen quite easily." But what I realized quite quickly was that a lot of the systems that I'd been working in as a social worker had built up all these other different ways of working that I needed to unravel and unpeel again before I could focus being on a therapist again and be more deeply relational. So I was still relational as a social worker, but not as deep as I go as a therapist.
Um, and did you ever have a case where a client knows that you're also a social worker? Because I think it's in the public domain. Maybe they could find out, and that becoming a barrier for them in some way?
Um, Potentially. I can't think of those specific examples of barriers. I've actually had people who have contacted me to be their therapist who, because I'm a social worker, and they feel like I might have some kind of insight or understanding around their situation. So that might be because of their work environment, or it might be because of something that they're going through. Um, I don't necessarily disclose that initially when I meet clients, but it is on my website now, so it wouldn't take much for people to kind of to see that and know. Um, so yeah, but I imagine some people might see that and not choose me as a therapist because of that, actually, because of some of the um issues around social work and the power dynamics within the social work role. Yeah.
Mm. So can I ask you some questions that I have in mind that the audience may have in mind?
Yeah.
I'm somebody who doesn't know much about social work, but I have a stereotype in my mind. So in my mind, when I hear that somebody is a social worker, I'm thinking the thoughts that come to my mind is that you are working with the system, and yes, you are there to serve the people, but perhaps the role is a little bit more what I would describe as intrusive as comparison to the counselor. Is that right?
Potentially, but I think it depends how you understand the social work role. So, for example, when I did my training, I did two different placements. One of them was with an LGBT plus charity in Liverpool, and the placement um, was about a broad thinking around social work. So, developing kind of therapeutic groups, maybe understanding different kind of outreach programs, educational programs. So it was kind of very broad in terms of how it understood social work, and I absolutely loved working there. Very therapeutic, actually, in a lot of that kind of work. My second placement was with a children with disabilities team, which was in a statutory setting. So there was legal obligations on me as a trainee and the social workers in that role to make assessments of children around the needs and the services that the local authority could provide. So and as well as that, the social worker role also had a child protection element. So if any issues were arisen around child protection or child safeguarding, then my role and other social workers' role would be to intervene, which could be around putting services in, but it could also be about going to court, foster placements, things like that. So there was definitely also an interventionist part of
Yeah.
that particular role.
Yeah, and I can see also how, as a social worker, you have knowledge on policies and systems and interventions like that. Me, that I'm not. I wish I had, because then that helps, safety plans and all sorts of other areas of support, which a counselor alone cannot do.
Yeah,
The
and I think
limitations, we have.
one of the things that role did help me identify was assessing risk, I think,
Yeah.
actually, and kind of understanding risk and the factors that kind of contribute to that. So yeah, I really appreciate that knowledge. And also, but I suppose one of the other things that I've seen, I was talking to somebody else about this the other day, actually, is the real negative impact of uh, systems and organizations and policies and procedures that can happen on people as well who are in that system. Obviously, people are trying to work to empower and to kind of support, but actually, when things kind of go wrong, like the real negative impacts that can have on people, and that actually informs a lot of my counselling practice. Actually, is understanding those issues around power and control.
Yeah. And I can't help to, not ask you about your research, which is about boundaries.
Mm.
And I wonder whether there's a link there with
Mm.
what you witnessed in both these roles.
Oh, absolutely. So my research around boundaries. So I've done some research for therapists, but I've also done research around social workers and boundaries as well. And I think what's interesting about each of those projects was that when I asked therapists about breaking boundaries and kind of understanding boundaries, they often wanted to protect themselves around from clients and things that were going on in the therapy space. And they broke boundaries by kind of like self-disclosing or kind of doing some kind of relational things that they wouldn't normally do. But when I spoke to the social workers about boundaries, they saw boundaries as very, very different. They saw them as like the organizational systems that they needed to kind of stick to. And when they broke boundaries, they were kind of breaking organizational procedures to kind of help service users and clients. So both of those kind of different professions saw them in quite very different ways. Um, I've had periods of time where I was a social worker and a therapist at the same time, and sometimes those roles conflicted too much that it was kind of too difficult to do both at the same time. So I would say now that I'm a therapist, I mainly work doing therapeutic work, and I still talk about social work. I still train social workers. I still kind of do some kind of research around that, but my practice is more aligned, I think, with therapy rather than social work per se.
Yeah. Fascinating.
So that's kind of me, but I'm very interested in your transition because you went from archaeology
Yeah.
to therapy, and I'm absolutely fascinated. What drew you to archaeology in the first place, and then the transition out of that?
Yeah. So, yeah, I grew up in Athens, and obviously, talking about archaeology in Athens is like we had this joke that if you dig in your garden, you may find Socrates' cup of tea or something. So I grew up, with a lot of interest in history and culture and the antiquities, and that was very much part of my, childhood. So I had an intellectual interest, and yeah, I guess it was pretty cool to go to university and study archaeology in Athens, where, all these international schools of archaeology are coming to study or going, to digs and stuff like that. So that's where I went to university. And it also had a component in philosophy, which I was also interested in, which actually then informed my thinking as a therapist. And I'm very much an existentialist. And obviously, the ancient Greeks and all these ideas that all those later philosophers who were influenced by ancient Greek thought, and Socratic questioning and all this kind of stuff. But I think that what happened to me during the years of studying archaeology, there is a process of, like digging into the unknown, going into the past and trying to understand the present through the past, trying to solve mysteries, trying to put, fragmented pieces together to create a whole. So that process was very much, if you think about it, there's a lot of relevance to counseling. And I'm also thinking of, writings from Freud and other, Jung and, around the archaeology of the psyche and the mind. So there's definitely a connection, which I wasn't conscious of until later on. But yeah, you could argue that therapists are kind of archaeologists when it comes to discovery, when it comes to wrestling with the unknown, trying to understand, the lost pieces in a client's process, isn't it? So
I mean, the imagery is quite vivid, isn't it? When you think of
about it, yeah, exactly. So although it was a big shift in terms of, a degree, it's totally different path and what you started to get into it, it did feel like a natural transition. And there was a point when I was about, I don't know, maybe 23 or something, 24, that I thought, I love archaeology, but I really want to work with people, not with objects. I think that was what I was missing, that if I imagine my life later on, I wanted to work with people. And then I thought, yeah, with counseling, this is what would really suit me in terms of, let's say, the relational aspect. Archaeology can be quite, being hidden in a lab with a lot of objects. And I mean, I love when I go to exhibitions and, to cultural events, but to actually practice it, I think it's quite a different story. And we also had the professors and the staff, the lecture I had at the university, especially the women, were women that, they didn't have children, they didn't have a family, they were constantly, if you are to do it properly, you have to be in some mountain somewhere in the middle of nowhere, trying to find, Alexander the Great's tomb or something. So I didn't think
sounds
it
quite
was
lonely.
yeah, it wouldn't fit like the lifestyle I would want to do, but I'm still interested in it, and I'm still, reading about it, and I love, you know, museums and that's such events. So yeah, that's how I came into it.
I love that. And then so how do you see that in terms of your practice? Do you still draw on anything from archaeology and what you learned there in terms of like your therapy practice?
Well, to be honest, it's not about the content itself, because, for example, I remember sitting exams in archaeology trying to describe, I don't know, a temple, every detail of how it was made or history or whatever. But it's more about the thinking process. Archaeology requires, uh, critical thinking, synthesizing ideas, creativity. So it's very much what sort of, mindset you have to approach that mystery. In archaeology, the mystery of what is it, how life was in another era. And also the echoes of the past from, to the present, although I'm not, particularly psychoanalytic, but of course, we're not separate or past. And I'm curious about somebody's story, although I tend to work with the here and now. But even in archaeology, you start with the here and now and go backwards and then come back to the present to reproduce and try to depict what is like, and, and who do you become now because as a result of what you carry. And we can talk about transgenerational trauma and other unconscious processes that come, into it. So although at first sight it doesn't look relevant, as I said, there is relevant in how you make sense, the meaning making, the putting the pieces together. It is like a puzzle, yeah, in a similar way that an archaeologist has a puzzle to solve. I think we therapists do that with our clients. We try to to find the missing piece or the aha moment.
Well, even as you were talking there, I was thinking, yeah, you could be talking about therapy, archaeology, but you could also be talking about academia in general, which is where we
Yes.
both work as well. Which I think is, yeah, I think it's interesting because I feel like we've also transitioned into academia as well as part of our therapy work. Yeah.
And I'm also thinking now, like for those who are listening, that to encourage people to be bold about making a change in terms of, the profession they're in. I can think of, in the 15 years that I've been a lecturer, I had students, I was also doing admissions interviews, all along. So I can think of students we had came from being teachers, from being into law, even from being firefighters, hairdressers, taxi drivers. They say that these three are usually counselors because they listen to people's problems, right? Um, so it's it's something to not be scared to do. Also, it's not uncommon for people to train as therapists at a later stage in life, to be mature students. Because some people, I can hear that, oh, I'm too old to go back to it. And I think also, I want to say a joke that I make in class. Therapy is maybe the only profession that the older you get, the better you're perceived. And I'm thinking also Agatha Christie's husband, who was an archaeologist, uh, she was saying that her husband was telling her that she's very happy to have an archaeology husband because the older she gets, the more he adores her. You know, you know, that is the joke we have. That I don't think you're ever too old to train as a therapist.
No, I completely agree with that. And I think it's really interesting now. I'm seeing people train as therapists now who are a lot younger, and so I think I'm seeing like the kind of
Mm.
breadth of
Oh, yeah.
ages, I think, and how different people bring those different experiences or professions or whatever it might be into their practice, and it informs who they are and how they work as a therapist, which is great. I think one of the other things we were going to touch on is this idea of portfolio working. And I feel like that's what we kind of both do now. We've got like a private practice, we teach, and then we also do research as well. And I think
Mm.
it's quite common, I think, not necessarily those particular professions, but quite common for, I think, for therapists to have that kind of portfolio working where they're doing different things as part of their career or work, I think.
Yeah, and I personally feel quite energized by having these multiple hats and one informing the other. Although sometimes it can also be hard to juggle and switch, from one to the other. But I think it's quite enriching, actually. Um,
I mean, I agree. I
yeah.
absolutely love it, the variety and the kind of crossover. But there are moments for me when I think, oh gosh, would it be better if I was just doing one thing here, The multiple email addresses. That's what it does it for me. I wish I just had one email address.
Yeah, and also I think it gives you also an independence in terms of, not relying on one employer. I think a lot of us, we want to have that freedom, don't we, in terms of
Yeah.
the work we do or different streams of income, different, I think it all comes into being freer from a more structured way of working, which would be, you have one job that you go every day to.
Yeah. And also I think there's something about like if you do work in private practice, but then you start another job, like maybe it's quite a big thing to give up your private practice and make it disappear, and actually sustaining it whilst you're in that other role might be important if you ever decide to leave it and you want to go back to working in your private practice or whatever, you're still kind of nourishing it, even if you're only doing it one day a week, say, for example.
Yeah. And another thing is also the professional mobility aspect. I think a lot of people want to increasingly be location independent. So I think if you have a portfolio way of working and some of it is online or all of it is online, which it can happen nowadays, then you have more choice in terms of where you live. I mean, some people tell me, "Oh, you're Greek. Why are you here? Why are you not in Greece? Sitting on the beach?" And I'm thinking sometimes, yes, I would love to be. I could be doing this, from a beachfront. And it's more about at the moment, in my life, because I have kids at school, that we need to be in a certain location. But in the future, when this is no longer relevant, yes, I could take my work and be at the beach.
And that is a huge benefit for therapists now, in terms of, like you say, if you move other jobs, or if you move locations or countries or whatever, there's still the possibility you can take some of those, maybe not, or maybe all of those clients with you potentially. Nothing necessarily has to change. Whereas in the past, yeah, you might have to give up working with those clients. So it's a lot more flexibility now than I think there used to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything that you don't like about portfolio working and kind of doing those multiple roles?
Well, there's definitely a diary organizing challenge that, it has perhaps a bit more admin, although having said that, I'm sure there are systems that one can put in place to bring a relief in that. But now maybe I'm in the honeymoon phase.
Yeah, it's more
More
recent
recent,
for you, actually. Yeah.
more recent for me because I was, in a full-time academic job for 11 years. So I actually now feel relieved that I'm no longer in that because, oh yeah, and not, I mean, I'm thinking of, it's more the positives. I think I'm de-institutionalizing myself.
Mm.
So yeah, portfolio working contributes to that. You de-institutionalize yourself inevitably. But I'm trying to think of the negatives. If I don't know, what do you find?
Um, I suppose some of the things are around things like, if I'm sick, say for example,
Yeah,
then I'm sick and as I don't get that income, I don't see those clients necessarily. Whereas in an organization, I might get sick pay or whatever. So that can be a bit of a pressure sometimes. Um, I think for me, but it's more about, like I was joking about the email addresses, but I think it's more the organization of things, really, of what days am I working self-employed, what days am I working for the university, and trying to juggle that, I think sometimes can be a bit of a challenge. But yeah, there's lots of flexibilities there, particularly around like time off and managing my own diary and all of those kind of things. I really like. I also think I'd have a difficulty teaching therapy without being a therapist, I think, as well.
yeah,
So I feel like, yeah, I know I research it and things like that, but I think I'd feel a bit strange doing that and teaching it without actually being in
yeah,
practice,
definitely.
you know? Yeah.
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 So I can't think of too many challenges.
Sounds good. We'll
Teaching
maybe
is
do this
very-
again in 5 years. I'll come back to you. So was there anything else you wanted to have as part of this discussion? Anything we've not covered that you thought we might mention?
Not really, other than an encouraging message that, follow your passion.
Yeah.
And if that involves having multiple hats, or I think some people, when they make professional transitions, they want to have this phase of developing more confidence and something steady in the new area before they leave something behind. And or some people think that they have to leave something behind and they don't obviously see that, oh, maybe you can combine your skills. Like I can think now of examples of students I had where I can think of a couple that come to my mind who were performers, they were actors, they were singers. And they think, oh, okay, do I have to leave this behind? Part of me wants to and part of me doesn't want to. And then I came up with the idea, well, why don't you provide counseling for performers? This is a niche area. And if I was a performer and I want to see a counselor, I would love to see you who knows the industry well and the pressures that I'm under. It's a bit like I was telling you before about I enjoy working with academics, but I know the, the context. So I think this is a good message that sometimes you can combine your skills or
Yeah.
you can develop confidence in a new area and leave something behind if you chose to.
Yeah. And I think there is something about that, people going on that journey to see how can I bring all of my experience together in some way, in the work that I do. And I think that's really quite exciting. And maybe in lots of other professions, it's not necessarily something that you can do, but in
Yeah.
therapy, there is a lot more possibilities, I think, than maybe people realize.
Yeah, because we work with the self. So
Yeah.
the self can be different, has different ways of expressing itself.
Yeah. And I think I know a lot of therapists now who kind of have maybe like a general counselling in terms of like, yeah, they're open to whatever private clients may contact them, but then also have like their specialism as well, as part of that. So they're not just seeing those type of clients, but they're kind of having a mix of different things. And yeah.
Yeah, and I think also because we work with people, whatever experience we've had is always somehow relevant to something because there's so much diversity, and who says that an experience in another profession won't be relevant to listening to some of the people in the counseling room? So it's about embracing it, really.
Yeah, embracing it. I love it. Well, Fenia, thanks very much. I think this has been, I've really enjoyed this discussion. Maybe we'll do some more in the future around other
Mhm.
topics
Me too.
potentially. And for anyone who is interested in Fenia's work, I will put all of her details in the show notes for this discussion so that you can, yeah, have a look at the work that she's doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter.